You talk to yourself more than you talk to anyone else. Estimates vary, but most researchers agree the number lands somewhere between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. The overwhelming majority of those thoughts are repeats from yesterday, and most people have never once stopped to listen to what that internal monologue is actually saying. The mental diet challenge is a structured way to eavesdrop on your own mind. For a set period, usually 7 days, you monitor every dominant thought, catch the negative ones in real time, and deliberately redirect them. The concept has been around for decades, but the mechanics of why it works are only now catching up with what practitioners have reported all along. The term traces back to Emmet Fox, a lecturer in the 1930s, who proposed a simple experiment. For 7 full days, refuse to dwell on any negative thought. The moment one appears, replace it. If you slip and dwell for more than a few seconds, you restart the clock. Day 1 becomes day 1 again. Fox claimed most people couldn't make it past lunch on the first attempt. Nearly a century later, people who try this report the same thing. The first few hours feel manageable. Then something happens. A slow driver, a sharp email, a memory you didn't invite, and suddenly you realize you've been running a hostile internal broadcast for the last 20 minutes without noticing it had started. That gap between a thought arriving and you noticing it arrived is the entire game. Psychologists call it metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thinking as it happens. And, like any ability, it starts weak. You wouldn't expect to run a marathon without training your legs. The mental diet trains the part of you that watches the thinker. The first few days feel clumsy. You catch thoughts late, after they've already colored your mood. By day 3 or 4, the lag shrinks. You start catching them mid-sentence. So what actually happens in that first week? Most people describe a specific sequence. The initial hours bring a strange kind of optimism. Monitoring your thoughts feels like a project, and projects feel productive. Then the volume hits. You realize the sheer quantity of mental chatter running beneath your awareness. One person described it as lifting a rock and watching everything underneath scatter. The thoughts were always there, you just never looked. By day 2, a pattern usually emerges. Certain thoughts repeat on a loop. Financial worry, social comparison, self-criticism, replaying old arguments with updated comebacks. The content varies person to person, but the structure is almost always repetitive. Your mind has grooves, worn paths. It defaults to the way water follows the lowest channel. The mental diet makes those grooves visible, sometimes for the first time. The redirect is where it gets tricky. Fox's original instruction was simple: replace the negative thought with a constructive one. Modern cognitive behavioral approaches refine this. The goal is to acknowledge the thought without feeding it energy, then consciously shift attention. The emphasis matters. You're redirecting attention, not suppressing the thought. Suppression backfires. Research on thought suppression consistently shows that trying to force a thought away makes it return stronger. The classic example: try to spend 30 seconds without thinking about a white bear. You'll think about a white bear roughly every 5 seconds. Daniel Wegner's research at Harvard demonstrated this paradox clearly. The mind monitors for the very thing you're trying to avoid, which keeps it active. The mental diet sidesteps this trap by giving you somewhere to go rather than something to flee from. When a self-critical thought surfaces, say, "I always mess this up," the redirect points toward a specific replacement, something concrete, something you can actually believe. "I handled the last project well enough to get asked back." The replacement has to feel credible. Affirmations that sound absurd to your own ear bounce off without effect. Your mind rejects statements it can't map to evidence. Around day 3, something subtle shifts. You start noticing thoughts earlier in their formation. Before they fully crystallize into words, you catch the emotional signature, a tightening in the chest, a slight drop in energy, a feeling of bracing. Thoughts have a physical footprint. The body often registers them before the conscious mind does. That tight feeling behind your sternum when you open your work inbox on Monday morning, a thought produced. That, learning to read the body signal, gives you a head start on the redirect. Critics raise a fair point about all of this. Monitoring your thoughts constantly sounds exhausting, maybe even counterproductive. And they're partially right. Hypervigilance about your own thinking can become its own form of anxiety, obsessively policing every mental flicker. The mental diet works best when treated as a training period, a temporary intensive, the way an athlete might do a 2-week conditioning camp. The goal is building the skill of noticing, then letting that skill run more automatically over time. You don't monitor every breath forever. You train breathing technique until it becomes your default pattern. Something interesting happens around days 5 through 7 for people who stick with it. The volume drops. The same repetitive loops that dominated the first few days start losing momentum. Cognitive behavioral researchers describe this as diffusion, the process of separating yourself from a thought enough that it loses its automatic authority. A thought like, "I'm going to fail at this," stops feeling like a fact and starts feeling like a sentence. Just words passing through. The content doesn't change immediately, your relationship to it does. One practical approach that helps during the challenge is carrying a small notebook or using a notes app to log recurring thoughts. The act of writing a thought down externalizes it. Something that felt urgent and all-consuming inside your head often looks oddly flat on paper. "Nobody respects my work," written down, you can see it for what it is, a generalization your mind generated, probably from one specific incident, then inflated to cover your entire life. The notebook becomes a mirror that shows you the distortion in real time. The 7-day structure matters more than it might seem. A single day of thought monitoring gives you data. A full week gives you patterns. You start seeing which times of day your thinking deteriorates. For most people, late evening and early morning are the lowest points. You see which triggers reliably start a negative cascade. You see which replacement thoughts actually stick and which ones your mind dismisses. By the end of the week, you have something close to a map of your own mental terrain. Specific valleys where your thinking dips. Specific ridges where it holds steady. People who repeat the challenge periodically, say 1 week every few months, report a cumulative effect. Each round, the baseline shifts. The grooves that once dominated start competing with newer patterns. The repetitive loops lose a little more traction each time. Cognitive behavioral therapy research supports this trajectory. Thought patterns respond to consistent, repeated intervention, the way physical habits do. The mechanism is the same. Repeated action, over time, shifts the default. The part most people underestimate is how much of their emotional life is downstream of thinking they never agreed to. You didn't choose to ruminate about that conversation from 3 years ago. You didn't decide to compare your career progress to a college friend's Instagram post. These thoughts arrived uninvited, ran their program, altered your mood, and left before you knew they'd been there. The mental diet challenge puts a security camera at the front door. You start seeing what walks in, and the realization that changes people is a quiet one. You are not your thoughts. You're the one who can watch them arrive, decide they're unhelpful, and send them on their way. That capacity was always there. The mental diet just gives it a job to do. 72 hours in, you'll catch a familiar negative loop starting up. And instead of following it down the usual path, you'll notice it the way you'd notice a rerun playing on a TV in another room. Still audible, easy to ignore, and that small distance between the thought and the you that observed it turns out to be the widest space you'll ever need.